What it do? Welcome to another new episode of Locked On Bucks. Listen, tough one, a tough one. The Bucks dropped the first game of the three-game road trip against the Pelicans, losing 100 to 107. Key turning point in the game, honestly, the second quarter. So we're going to break down key takeaways and highlight some areas where this team has to improve. All that and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Bucks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Camille Davis. You can catch me weekly on the Technical File podcast as well as the Pack-A-Day podcast. Joining me is Justin Garcia, voice of the Bucks Radio Network. We appreciate you for tuning in and thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every day, even after tough L's like tonight. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast as well as on YouTube. Today's episode was brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. So visit fanduel.com/lockedon to get started. Justin, we were talking a little bit before we started recording, and this game, in my opinion, was lost in the second quarter. The Bucks dug a hole that they spent the rest of the game trying to dig themselves out of, and they just didn't have enough. And in this matchup, the Pelicans are an interesting matchup for the Bucks because they have so much length and athleticism. The Bucks are normally the bigger team, when they're playing basketball, but that wasn't the case as much against New Orleans with Herb Jones out there and just the length that they're able to put on the court. But that second quarter, it just got really bad for the Bucks. I don't have any other words to say, but the Bucks got punked in the second quarter.
It was not good in the second quarter because it felt like a pretty tight game for most of that first quarter. I think it was a 1-point lead the Pelicans took into the second, but it was back and forth. I know the Bucks had not even pulled ahead, but went up by 2 possessions. It seemed like that's where it sat. Like it was mostly a 3-point game for that quarter. And then a couple of failed possessions, and it just took a little bit, but you looked up at the score and thought, holy cow, they're down by 15 here. Like when did this start to slip away? And I think, look, if we talk about the encouraging aspects of this tonight, Giannis is obviously number one. Malik Beasley, too, with what he gave you. Another game where he hit 6 3-pointers. And that's the toughest part is when you look at the final tally and you say, man, we lost the game where Malik Beasley scored 20 points. Like we've seen some of those performances from Bees recently where you're just waiting for him to get going. And he had it tonight. And it felt like a wasted opportunity and wasted performance there. But it was really, it came down to some of the numbers we'll get into in the hustle categories that the Pelicans dominated. But this really was Giannis and Malik Beasley and nothing else. I know Damian Lillard got to 20 points, but it just never really felt like 20 points. And even guys like Chris, he did a lot of everything. And Bobby Portis, it just wasn't the production we've seen from these guys recently. And on a night where Giannis was, again, incredible, and we talk about Malik Beasley's performance being wasted, same for Giannis.
Truly, because the second quarter, they dug themselves in such a big hole. The effort that Giannis put in that third quarter, seeing him score 20 straight points, it was fantastic. He went 8 of 9 from the field in the third quarter. The only shot he missed was like his heat check 3 that he took. But even in the third quarter, when they were able to get the game closer, it just felt like too many missed opportunities for them down the stretch. Like in the fourth quarter, they were able to get the Pelicans lead down to 3. It was 71-74 when Giannis, again, going crazy, doing like the Lord's work for the Bucks in the third quarter. And that came after a second quarter where the Pelicans went into the zone. Mentioned already how that second quarter really sunk the Bucks, and I'll jump back to exactly what that was. But In the second quarter, you saw the Pelicans throw out a zone against Giannis and the Bucks, and you saw Giannis settling a bit for some jumpers. He went for that elbow mid-range shot that he likes, went for one of the little Dirk fadeaways that he likes, went for three empty possessions for the Bucks, and the Pelicans just kept rolling. But in that third quarter, you saw him getting downhill. You saw him attacking. And once they got it down to 3, unfortunately, the Pelicans get a 3. Then it's a Bucks turnover. It's another Pelicans 3. Then the Bucks don't score, and then Larry Nance gets a 3. Like it just happened so quickly where you're looking at the scoreboard and you're like, hey, this team is only down by 3 after, being down big in the first half, down by as much as 18 in the first half. And you see them get the score down to 3, but then that's with 3 minutes left to go in the third quarter. Then over the last 3 minutes of the third quarter, you see the Pelicans rip off an 11-2 run of their own to go into the fourth, back up double digits again. So it's like, the Bucks spent all this time in the third quarter chipping wood, just trying to keep it close, making it a game, just to see that lead extend again. And then in the fourth quarter, still not having enough offense to make this a win for the Bucks.
Yeah, and that 11-2 run was it was very deflating. And
Yes.
One of the positives too is Doc has talked a lot recently about third quarters, and he's been asked a number of times about the importance of getting off to a fast start. And he's acknowledged, yes, that is true. We don't want to have some of those starts that we saw from the Bucks earlier in the season. But to me being Doc, third quarter is more important for me and this group to win, that we got to come out and play well in those third quarters. And I think you've seen that recently. It's been fairly consistent for this team of late, but we've seen a couple of those first quarters and second quarters. And tonight it was the second quarter that, the Bucks went on a run. So it is, in some ways, it's tough to say, well, the second quarter is what sank them. But look, if you played the way that you did in the third quarter and it was a similar story in the first quarter, well, then you're talking about taking a 12-point lead into the fourth quarter instead of still trying to claw back. So to me, that's kind of the well, here's the good and the bad. And it just goes back to the consistent message we've heard from Doc Rivers through wins and losses of, even when they won. Yeah, this is great that we're winning, but guys, this isn't fixed yet and we're not there yet. So I think that's kind of the up and down that we've seen from this team. But when you looked at the numbers for tonight, all of those hustle categories that you would point to, and look, the Pelicans, that's what they do, right? They're very good at causing turnovers and scoring off of turnovers. Even Jonas Valanciunas and what he can do around the basket. This, ironically, was another one of those games, which the Bucks will have another on Saturday, where the Bucks lose to a team that's playing without their best or one of their best players. But to me, what really stood out were a handful of things. The second quarter is obviously huge, but points in the paint, the Bucks did a decent job of offsetting that. When you're going up against Zion Williamson, just as teams prepare for Giannis, you're going to deal with a lot of points in the paint. 52-44. So it's not bad. You weren't crushed in the paint. But offensive rebounds, it felt like the first 3 quarters of the Lakers game where they were dominant on the offensive glass. 11 for the Pelicans. They scored 17 points off of those. So they were plus 12 in points scored off of offensive rebounds. Turnovers. Bucks had 14 of them. Yeah, so twice as many as the Pelicans. And the Pelicans scored 17 points off of those. You just scored 2 points off of turnovers. So to me, you outshot them. And that's the other discouraging part here. You outshot the Pelicans from the field and from 3. You made more threes. But the fact that the Pelicans were plus 8 in points in the paint, plus 12 on second chance points, plus 15 on points off of turnovers, and plus 17 on free throws, which I think is a larger discussion. That's where the game was lost. As much as we can point to the second quarter did them no favors, but the consistency of those stat lines, that's where the Bucks lost this game.
Yeah, and that's fair because that second quarter was where I started to really notice the physicality difference between the two teams, where it's like, man, it just feels like the Pelicans are being the aggressive team. They're being the more physical team. And that's a point we've heard Doc make about this Bucks team. And he's mentioned time and time again, this is not a Bucks team that's really athletic or young. They're slow. They're big. They want to get into mud fights where they can be a physical team. And here you are against the Pelicans. and they just out physicaled you. Like you mentioned the final numbers, and you look at the points in the paint at halftime, and it was 20-36 advantage for the Pelicans at that time. Like it just, you saw it just very clearly in the second quarter that they established what they were going to be looking like today, how they were going to play defense. And even with the way they play defense, that's something that stood out to me when I watched the Pelicans. It's just like, this is a long team. Like they have a lot of length on defense, and they are playing passing lanes, and you cannot be lackadaisical with your ball movement. You have to move the ball with a purpose. And early on in the game, it felt like the Bucks were being a little bit too casual with the ball at times. But to your point that we mentioned, like just at the end of the game, you look at the hustle stats. They got out hustled. And we mentioned it's a game where Giannis played well. Big third quarter. Bees held down the fort. And even Dame, like we can talk a little bit more about Dame up next, as well as some other Bucks players. But between Dame and Bees, they were 9 of 17 from three. The rest of the team was 5 of 22 from three. Like it just was one of those games. But there are some other Bucks players. We highlighted the good that we saw from Giannis and Bees tonight, but there are a few Bucks players who feel like they got to kind of step up their game. Like they just weren't good enough tonight for the Bucks to win. So let's talk about their play right after this. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and leave it and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you will always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you'll be burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guarantee Fit is only available to U.S. customers. We appreciate you for tuning in to Locked On Bucks. A special shout out to the everydayers who make sure they tune in Monday through Friday. I got to tell you guys, listen, I know a lot of times you're watching Fox Sports, you're watching ESPN, and you're like, there's not enough Bucks talk. Although after a loss like this, you might not want to hear a lot of Bucks talk from those platforms. But make the switch over to Locked On Sports today, which is a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every single day to bring you the biggest stories in sports. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news. It's streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, Justin, we mentioned Bees, we mentioned Giannis and gave them some kudos for their play, but the guys who it was a tough game for, I feel like that list is quite longer. It was a tough game for Chris. It was a tough game for Brooke. Tough game for Bobby Portis. Tough game for Pat Bev. And while it felt like you saw Dame's final stat lines and you're like, okay, 50% from the field, like, okay, Dame, like not a bad night, especially given the fact that he got hit in his calf to end the second quarter. He got his lip busted. He went and got stitches during the third quarter. Like, he was banged up in this game. Mentioned it was physical. You saw that play out with Dame, but I still felt at times that Dame was playing a little too passive in the second half when there were some shots where I'm like, I've seen him walk into these pull-up threes where the big is playing off of him. He has enough space to get the shot off, and he was passing right out of those. So I was like a little too passive for me. I mentioned Chris, Brooke, Bobby, Pat. I don't even know where to start, Justin, on how the play from those guys have to be better to win this game, and as well for the Bucks going forward to really achieve that championship aspiration that they have.
Yeah, all the above, I guess. I mean, Bobby, I thought it was an especially tough night for Bobby, and Doc talked about that a little bit in the post game, saying he felt he needed to do a better job too of kind of reining Bobby in, as there was some chippiness, and talking about it's fine to play with a passion. And this coming 24 hours after Draymond Green with those double technical fouls, getting another ejection. But Doc kind of pointing to that and saying, look, we don't want it to get there. We don't want the technicals. I don't want to try to break in Bobby Portis. And I still want you to play with that emotion, but you can't hurt the team. Mm-hmm. And he kind of alluded to, I think at times Bobby hurt us with his play. But the Dame part, I think, is a larger conversation. So I think just to start with who needed to be better, it was across the board. Because on a night where you only had 3 scores in double figures, I know it's easy to look, as you pointed out, it's easy to look at the stat sheet and say, well, Dame shot 50% from the field. Like, you need more than 20 points from Damian Lillard on a night where you just have 3 double-digit scores. You got 35 from Giannis, you got 20 from Beasley. That's great. I know it may be a little unfair to kind of hold him to that standard, but you just needed more from Dame tonight, especially in a night where Chris struggled mightily from the floor in terms of his efficiency. I think it was 3 of 12 or 2 of 13. It was a tough night for Brooke Lopez. Bobby Portis, we already mentioned. You know, that's what stands out the most is you think about how productive the bench has been recently. I don't think it's a coincidence that it's come with the return of Chris Middleton, that everybody has been able to take on a lesser role, and Chris has been able to play with the bench and get them going as well. But it wasn't there tonight, and you just need more than 5 points from Bobby Portis and 11 total from your bench, because that's kind of what we were seeing in the middle of the season when we were talking about, man, what's going on with his bench, and it was nights like tonight that you were seeing. But to me, the interesting thing is, I mentioned the free throw discrepancy. Pelicans get to the line a decent amount. The Bucks, still by the numbers season as a whole, pretty good at getting to the free throw line, but they've tailed off significantly in these last couple weeks. And for Dame, it's been the last couple games, especially. January 31st is when it seems like was the unofficial, okay, we're officiating things differently from this point forward. Damian Lillard's gone from 6th to 27th in free throw rate from that point forward. And look, Doc Rivers has pointed it out too, that again, it may be unfair, but it's just the way things are. Dame is on the video that the league is showing of here's what we're cracking down on. So it's going to impact him even more than others. But from 6th to 27th, I mean, other guys have been impacted. We've heard people mention Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and some of his scoring dips. It hasn't been a fall off a cliff, but some of his scoring dips. Well, he's not getting to the free throw line as much. Joel Embiid's out of it because that started with Joel Embiid not being on the floor. But, Giannis's free throws have come down by 1 per game. Damian Lillard has dropped precipitously. His drop has been that Dame and Giannis were averaging, I think it was about 20 free throw attempts per game prior to that date, and it's around 14 since, which it may not seem like much, like, oh, we're just talking about 6 free throws, but it's a number of things, right? It's not only getting to the free throw line, that's going to boost your half-court offense. Damian Lillard's the best free throw shooter in the league, even though you wouldn't have known it by watching just tonight. So those are basically guaranteed points. And as we've talked about with Giannis in the past, it's not so much the free throw attempts, it's the fouls and getting your team in the bonus and getting guys in foul trouble. And that's part of it with Dame too. So I don't know where it's headed, and I don't know that it should be an elevated level of concern. It is something to keep an eye on and file away that, man, this guy's he's been impacted more than any other player in the league. I think when we get to the playoffs, is it going to be like it is now? No, but I think it's going to be closer to what it is now than it was what we were seeing before. But I think, the most interesting part to me, and I'll get your opinion on this too, is I think you can explain all that stuff of, here's what they're taking away. And we've seen a number of times this season too, that Dame has been visibly frustrated by not getting that call even before January 31st. Yep. And Doc's message all along has been, just play through it. You're not going to get the call. Get back on defense. Don't chirp at the officials. Just play through it. But to me, what I cannot explain is, the free throw rates have gone down. Everything else has gone up for Damian Lillard. He has been more efficient from the field and from 3. His assists have gone up. His scoring has remained consistent, almost, all the way down to the decimal point in terms of what he was scoring before versus after. It's just not coming at the free throw line.
It's something that you mentioned earlier where it's like this might seem unfair to be holding Dame to this certain level, but that's one of the things about being a great player. The standard that you're held to is just going to be a little bit higher. The free throw part with Dame is definitely key to point out, especially how they react when they don't get the foul calls. Like Doc has mentioned in practice that when he's calling it, he's like, I'm not giving them fouls if I think it's a bad shot. He's like, and guys might not like that, but honestly, with the way that games have been called more recently, like the way it seems that Doc has been calling games in practice is the way that they need to kind of get used to officiating. Because to your point, when you get to the playoffs, it's not likely to go back to getting more whistles. It's more likely for them, if not to tighten up on the whistle a little bit more or call it how you've been seeing it called. So that's an aspect of it where if you're not getting the foul calls, you can't lose your aggressiveness. You also can't go in just trying to foul hunt. You have to go in with the intention to score. But if you don't get it, then get back onto defense because you don't want to put your teammates in a situation where they're playing 4-on-5 or something like that. But that's a great point. And we got to talk about Chris Middleton as well. People who listen to this show know, people who know me know, I'm a big fan of 22, huge Chris Middleton fan. But what we've seen from Chris over the last 3 games, it just hasn't been good enough for this team. He is a key cog in the offense for this team. So when he is not performing at the level that we know Chris Middleton can, it's going to be a lot more difficult for the Bucks to win, especially on a night like tonight where you're looking at Giannis like, hey, you did your job here. We got a 20-point game from Bees. We saw 20 from Dame, although, like I said, I feel like there were some shots that Dame could have taken that he didn't, and he was just being a little bit too passive. But Chris, since he returned from injury, this is his 5th game back from the ankle injury. His first 2 games, he was shooting 64% from the field, 57% from 3. Over the last 3 games, 32% from the field, 21% from 3. And again, both of these are really small sample sizes. Yeah. I'm not sure if at this point it's tired legs, like he's getting back into the swing and his conditioning up. Did just play a lot of minutes against the Lakers. Again, it's not an excuse, but just trying to look at what I'm seeing, it's like, well, what's happening here for Chris to be coming up short? A lot of the shots are short, front rim, and normally that's leg. So I do wonder with Chris if this little slump that we're seeing is him just trying to get his win back as he readjusts to being back on the court after missing time.
Yeah, and even the triple double game, like on the surface, it was a good game from like obviously more than a good game. If you record a triple double, it says something. But the numbers that you pointed to, it hasn't been the efficient Chris that we've seen, and he was fine, I think, from the floor in that game against the Thunder. But it was more the threes, and they've been clean looks, as you would expect with Damian Lillard and Giannis on the floor with you in a bulk of those minutes. You're going to get some pretty decent looks. As you pointed out, it is worth mentioning. It's a small sample size, but it's just one of those, same with the free throw thing with Dame.
Yep.
Let's just make note of this and keep an eye on it. And I think, to kind of tie the two together, I don't know that it explains the drastic drop, but I do wonder the free throw stuff with Damian Lillard tonight was certainly not part of it, but the numbers, how we've seen it drop and Dame's free throw rate drop, I think it was 23 or 24 games since that January 31st date that we're talking about here. Well, let's also remember 16 of those have been without Chris Middleton on the floor. Some of those were without Brook Lopez. So I know that's not a ton, but the Chris sample size is pretty large where it's, it changes how defenses can react and what they have to do. And will those fouls go up when you're full strength? And it's, oh crap, that's Chris Middleton in the corner. We got to react differently. So I think that is fair to point out as well, but it's one of those things where you think, okay, we got to keep an eye on this going into the postseason. And with Chris too is, all right, let's see if we see any prolonged stretches, or I think you get the schedule going in your favor a little bit here in the coming weeks, especially since we all assume Chris is not going to play in both sets of the back-to-back, and you have another one coming up next week. So that'll buy you some more time, and you got 2 days off after the Hawks game. But that is one of those other things of, all right, let's see how Chris is looking going into the postseason.
Yeah, absolutely. There is one more guy I want to ask you about when we come back from this break with his play. We talked about him on Thursday's episode of Locked On Bucks, and that's Mr. Patrick Beverly. He made the announcement on his podcast about the risks needing surgery and possibly being out 3 to 4 months. We were reacting to that. And next thing you know, we see him playing in this game. So I do want to talk about Pat Bev and take a look ahead to the Bucks' next matchup, which happens to be against the Atlanta Hawks. So let's get into that when we come right back. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little bit further? You ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drives and great escapes. Class exclusive Google built-in is your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. So gone are the days of connecting your phone because Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect midsize crossover for your next adventure. Nissan's incredible lineup also includes the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder, which has room for up to 8 people. Also has an expansive cargo capacity and advanced available 4x4 capabilities. With 284 horsepower and up to 6,000 pounds towing, when adventure calls, the Pathfinder is there to answer. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop nissanusa.com. Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis, like Locked On Network. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV. Whether it's opening weekend for baseball or the college basketball tournament, you're going to want to have a Fire TV. Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sport brands, all for free. That includes all of us at Locked On and most of the big pro leagues and college conferences as well. Fire TV channels let you dive into all of the game analysis, highlights, and more to keep up to date on all the latest in the world of sports. Not to mention great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, cooking videos as well. So make sure you check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. Trust me on this one. To learn more, visit amazon.com/locked on Fire TV. Mr. Pat Bev, like I mentioned, just one more guy I wanted to call out here when just talking about play, because I applaud Pat. We talked about him wanting to try to play through this injury, and we had conversation around, well, what does that look like offensively for this team? If he has a bad wrist, how will that affect the shot? Our team's going to start playing him differently. Tonight, he was 0 for 4, 0 for 3 from 3. After his last missed three, you see AJ Green check into the game for just about 2 minutes of play. But that comes in the fourth quarter, where it's like, AJ, you haven't played the entire game. Just go out here for a couple of minutes. And with Pat's injury and knowing that this is something that is going to need surgery to repair itself, I mean, he's going to look to play through it. I do wonder if we start to see a shift in minute allocation where maybe it is AJ Green getting a little bit more opportunity to play. Again, Pat Bev plays a crucial role as a bench player on this team. Come playoff time, we're not expecting Pat Bev to be getting 30 minutes a night or anything like that. But in the minutes that he does have to close out the regular season, I do wonder how Doc might look to maybe split those minutes, maybe just see what other combinations might look like. Do you think we might see a little bit more AJ Green, because he's someone whose minutes have fluctuated as is? Like, if you were betting on what his minute load was going to be on a game-to-game basis, good luck. Like, it's hard to call it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess AJ Green, I don't know that it's an uptick for Pat Connaughton, really, because that's the other guy you would point to and say, well, we saw Pat play point guard and dish out 9 assists the other night.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think AJ Green, especially because after the game, Doc said, I should have gone to AJ Green sooner. And I don't think it was even just because of, well, Pat didn't have it, or I should have given Pat more rest. It was just, we got to hit shots. When you look at Chris's shooting and Brooks and basically everybody but Malik Beasley on threes.
Yeah.
You needed somebody else. So Doc kind of acknowledged I should have gone to AJ Green sooner. The Pat Beverly thing, I mean, what a 24 hours with
Quite a twist.
we did the show talking about, well, I guess they're no longer 100% in Pat Beverly. You know, we both said, I guess you're probably not going to see him again this regular season, and maybe you might not see him in the first round. Who knows? To you fast forward to game day, and I think we all kind of noticed, wait a minute, he's listed as probable now? Like, what is going on here? So much that I texted Dave Kane and said, this is a mistake, right? Why is Pat Beverly listed as probable? I'm still, oh no, I just witnessed him on the floor going through practice with the team, and he plans on playing. So it does seem like or sound like this is a very similar injury to what a few of his teammates dealt with the last 2 years. Was it last year Giannis had the wrist issue, or is that 2 years ago? I think that was 2 years ago in the Bulls.
Because wait, was Chris was 2 years ago? I think Giannis might have been last year. I can't remember whose was first.
Either way, yeah. It seems like it's the same or very similar to what they were dealing with. And as we learned with Giannis, it was pain threshold, basically. What can you tolerate? Chris, we didn't know about until after the fact, but it sounds like that's what Pat's dealing with. So again, it's going to be crucial to have him. As we mentioned, you know, you don't rely on Pat Beverly for offense, but you need some of that help in perimeter defense. I think the blessing, I don't know how to even word that because we're talking about an injured player here, but the fact that it is Pat Beverly and it's not a 30 minutes a game type of player that you're looking at here. I think the only thing is, you mentioned the 0 for 3 shooting tonight. I don't know how much of that was due to the wrist because Pat Beverly had not been lighting the world on fire with his shooting this season. But, you know, if it does get to the point where we're talking about, man, you had another 0 for 3 game and these are piling up, and it is pretty apparent that, yeah, the wrist is playing even more of a factor in that. You know, then you're going to reach the point, and the Bucks experienced this in 2021. So as we look for as many comps to 2021 as we can find, it does run the danger of reaching the point where teams are going to be basically playing you 5-on-4 and saying, we can just leave Pat Beverly in the corner or wherever it is. If he hits it, he hits it, but we don't think he will.
Right. Like I'm going to dare you to shoot. If you make it, then so be it. I mean, Bucks fans saw that in the playoff series against the Celtics with Grant Williams, which we don't like to discuss, but that is what happened. The Bucks have now, as I mentioned, lost back-to-back games, and they lost the first game of this 3-game road trip. So they're now 46-27 on the season with 9 games left to go to finish out this regular season. We see the Bucks back on the court on Saturday against the Atlanta Hawks, who did just beat the Boston Celtics in overtime. The Hawks have now won 4 straight. They beat the Hornets, they beat the Celtics, they beat the Trailblazers, and they beat the Celtics again.
All at home. Celtics for the second time in a week.
Right. All at home. They're on the middle. They're getting ready to wrap up a 5-game homestand, with the Bucks being that final game at home for them on this homestand. And listen, the Bucks have to go and get a win. There were only 2 games on in the NBA tonight, with the Bucks and the Celtics both losing. Looking at the standings real quick, the Bucks do still hold on to that 2 seed, but the Knicks are now in that 3 seed with the Cavaliers in 4. So heading into Atlanta on Saturday, that's a game that the Bucks are going to look at. And you look at the schedule, you look at who's playing. You know there's no Trae Young, but as we saw tonight against the Celtics, with DeJounte Murray dropping 44 points on 44 shot attempts, you can't count them out.
Yeah, and you can't count them out. And as I kind of joked about before, it's going to be another dreaded game where you're playing a team without their leading scorer. So we'll see what happens there. But I think, and I talked about this elsewhere, these next 5 games are the biggest of the season for the Bucks, if the 2 seed is important to you, because you have 4 straight games against teams that are either the 10 seed in the case of the Hawks, or completely out of the playoffs. And then after that 4-game stretch, 2 of them are at home. Then you have that game against the Knicks. Now, the math is still very much on the Bucks side. It's 1 game in the loss column against the Knicks, but you do hold the tiebreaker. So the Knicks are going to have to outplay you by 2 games down the stretch. If the Bucks go 5-4 here, in these final 9 games, Knicks would still have to go 8-2 to pass the Bucks. So that's where we talk about the math being on your side. Same story for the Cavaliers, though they have the tiebreaker over the Bucks. So I still feel like the Bucks are going to be the 2 seed. But as we mentioned before, if you want to not leave it to chance, win these 4 games, because these are what you would point to and say, all right, we should win these games. Bucks are going to be favored in these. It's a 10th seeded Hawks and 3 teams that are out of the playoffs, especially as you're tuning up for the playoffs. These are games you need to win. If you do that, I think you get to 51 wins this season. It's going to be tough for teams to catch you because of what we said they would have to do. And you get those 4 wins, you're already up to 50 wins. So that basically is going to go a long way in setting that up. But it may come down to that game April 7th, deciding who gets the 2 seed in the Eastern Conference.
It's going to be it's a big day, Justin. As you know, it's day 2 of WrestleMania, and it's a big day for the Bucks as well. So make sure you all are tuning in to Locked On Bucks as we keep you covered with all the Bucks news down the stretch here of the regular season, heading into the playoff push and then into the playoffs itself. So I feel like this is a good spot to wrap up for the day. Make sure that you all go and check out Locked On Sports Today on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe as well. For Justin and myself, we'll catch you all next week. Have a good weekend, y'all.